Now, the word pornography is a term that in the 19th century it first came to be, and it denoted engravings or writings on a wall about prostitution. Okay? Now, people who make pornography intend for people who are seeing it, visually seeing it, to interact with the images. That's the intention. Now, a lot of you might have your own definitions of what pornography might be. But as we go through the talk, you'll see that the definition can't simply be just restricted to videos or images of a barely sexual nature. Okay? And the reason being is because of what the intention of pornography is, what the aim of pornography is, what pornography is intended to do to the people watching it. Okay? Now, in America, the porn industry alone generates annually $13 billion. $13 billion. Okay? Now, in recent years though, the income from pornography has almost halved. Now, do you think that is because people are watching less? No. The reason being is because of the availability now of free pornography. Okay? Now, the interesting thing is, between the ages of 18 to 30, millennials we call them, 63% of men and 21% of women say that they engage with pornography several times a week. Now, 63% doesn't seem like a lot when it comes to men, and you know your own experiences and I know mine. However, we have to understand that when they collected the data was for those that were viewing it several times a week. So if the data was going to be to find out how many people view it a couple of times a week or once a week, then the statistics would be a lot higher than just 63%. But alarmingly, 21%, over 20% of women watch pornography as well in some form or another. Now, because the revenue from pornography has been declining in recent years, producers of pornography have sought other ways in which to attract consumers. And the interesting thing is that what pornography producers have done, or people within the industry, is they have gone and paid for the advice of psychologists and clinicians who diagnose people with sexual addictions to be able to get data from them in order to find the best way to be able to produce material for people to get addicted to it. Okay? Now, the goal of this talk is to expose a couple of myths. One of the myths is that pornography is not that bad. It's harmless. Have you ever heard of anyone who says, as long as he's watching it in his room and he's not out there hurting anybody else, what kind of an effect will it have on anybody else? You know? Or if I decide to enjoy pornography within the confines of my own home, how am I harming anybody else? Okay? Other myths that you might hear are that the women that are in these pornographic movies, for example, are doing it of their own free will. Okay? And another myth is that pornography can also aid in the sexual arousal between couples, and it helps marriages rather than breaks them. Has anyone heard of any of those myths? Okay, if there are any others as well, we're going to be looking, at expelling these in tonight's talk. Now, the problem with porn is not that it shows too much, but that it shows too little. All it does is it reduces people purely to their sexual organs as a means of gratification. Now, the interesting thing about the human species is that we're very, very different to other animals. One thing that makes humans unique amongst all the different species is that we have been designed for pair bonding. Okay? Monogamy, one man, one woman, monogamous relationships. Within our bodies, we've actually been designed to look for and to commit to lifelong partners. Has anyone ever heard of the neurochemical oxytocin? Oxytocin is a neurochemical that is released in the brain, and it's released in the brain in women during breastfeeding and child rearing. And what it does is when it's released, it creates an attachment between the mother and her offspring. Oxytocin is also released, the chemical is also released during sex and especially during orgasms. Why? Because what it does is the chemical releases within the brain and it creates feelings of attachment when those chemicals are released. So that if a person is being intimate, a man is being intimate with a woman and vice versa, the oxytocin and the chemical will create feelings of attachment between the two partners. Why? With the intention that they will be together for life. Now, there was a study that was done in which they got a set of men who were in committed relationships, and they gave them oxytocin via a nasal spray, and then they put them in a room where there were attractive women, and the ones that received the oxytocin spray were more likely when they entered the room to stay distant from females of the opposite sex when they were in committed relationships. And then on the other hand, they found that those males who weren't in committed relationships who received the placebo or a fake of the oxytocin spray didn't distance themselves from the women when they entered into those rooms and those situations. Now, the interesting thing about the chemical is that it can have a twisted effect when it comes to pornography. Now, neuroscientist William Struther says, with repeated sexual acting out in the absence of a partner, a man will be bound and attached to the images and not a person. So if oxytocin is released when a person is feeling aroused or when a person is ejaculating in front of an image, then the chemical will develop a bond between the person and the image rather than a person. And that's the twisted effect that the oxytocin can have when used in the wrong way. Behavioral therapist Andrea Kazilski says that porn can trigger the release of neurochemicals just as sex can, bonding the person to the endless novel of porn, and those chemicals make you want to keep coming back to have that feeling over and over again. And that's where we get the addiction. Now we're going to look at the impact of pornography on the brain. The prefrontal cortex is a part of the brain that's responsible for making decisions, willpower, regulating behavior. It also makes judgments about good and bad as well. Now, by the age of 25, this region seems to be, of the prefrontal cortex, seems to be very fairly developed, and it reaches maturity. And when it comes to regulating emotions, it becomes a lot easier. Now, scientists have come now to see that continued exposure to porn actually has an effect on the prefrontal cortex of the brain. What happens is that when the images and the images are portrayed and the person's dopamine levels spike, it creates an unnatural high. And the brain eventually, if it's repeated, begins to fatigue. It becomes tired. Now, what causes the same phenomenon is drug abuse. The brain becomes desensitized, and more of the drug is needed in order to get the same effect. Now, a study of cocaine addiction in 2002 found similar results, and it showed shrinkages in several areas of the brain. A study in 2004 found similar results with those who used methamphetamine. Now, what actually surprised researchers was to find the same results of this shrinking in the prefrontal cortex of the brain for people who overeat, people who suffer from obesity. And then a year later, in 2007, they found the same kind of brain damage in persons who exhibited severe sexual addiction. Now, if the frontal lobes if the prefrontal lobes are weakened, when the craving for porn hits, there is little willpower present to be able to regulate or to fight against the desire. So, within your own experiences, or of those that you've heard about, you'll understand that as soon as a person develops an addiction of any sort, and we are all wired in a way for addictions, is that as soon as the brain matter begins to shrink, as soon as the prefrontal lobes begin to weaken, it becomes harder for us to resist whenever we're presented with those same images in the future. Now, what's the impact of pornography on relationships? Now, the thing is that when a woman finds out that her husband's using porn, it can be pretty demoralizing. And the interesting thing is that men, especially if they've been exposed to pornography from such a young age, tend to learn about sex from porn. And then what they learn from pornography, they tend to bring into the bedroom to use it on their wives. And a lot of women can be blind, and even men can be blind to how painful and distressing porn sex actually is. And what it tends to do is it discourages within a man empathy, the ability to feel sorry, or to have consideration for his wife or his partner's feelings, especially during that situation. Porn also shapes a person's concept of what beauty actually is. There was a French neuroscientist by the name of Serge Stollerer, and they said that what ended up happening was that overexposure to pornography tends to reduce or tends to change our perception of beauty. And what they found that when they did a study where men and women were exposed to magazines, centerfold models and Playboy magazines, this lowered their judgments about attractiveness of average people. And it literally changed people's standards. And what impact would that have on relationships? If a man or woman are continually being shown images of fake beauty, and then they make that association, then when it comes time to being intimate with their partners in real life, and their partners have the natural blemishes that are normal and abundant within our daily world, they don't become as attracted anymore. And it has an effect on the relationship. One important effect as well is on the ability for porn and its effect on premarital and extramarital sex as well. Now, pornography displays extramarital sex or adultery as being exciting. And what ends up happening is that people that become used to and entrenched in pornography, they start to see extramarital sex or sex with other partners as being normal. In 2016, in Australia, there were 46,604 divorces. In 2003, a survey of 350 divorce lawyers in America revealed that porn use was a factor in more than half or 50% of the cases. So half the divorces in America, according to these divorce lawyers, are because of pornography. Okay? What's the impact of porn on health? A study found that 64% of men, ages between the ages of 27 and 31, had developed tastes for pornography that became extreme and deviant. Okay, if you know what I mean by that. 19% were suffering from premature ejaculation. 25%, a quarter, were completely disinterested in sex with their partner. 31% had difficulty reaching orgasm, and 34% were experiencing erectile dysfunction. As soon as they quit their porn habits, 60% found that their sexual functions had actually improved. Okay? Now we're going to have a look at the actual industry of pornography itself. Dr. Sharon Mitchell, she's the founder of the Adult Industry Medical Health Center, says that 66% of porn stars have herpes. Now there are two types of porn films. There's feature films and there's gonzo films. Feature films have a storyline and a plot. However, gonzo films, which are the more popular ones, cut straight to the chase. Because it revolves around sex scenes alone, gonzo films tend to be more body punishing, as one porn star or ex-porn star describes it. Now, Danielle Williams, an ex-porn star, says that she saw a lot of brutality in her years in the industry. This is what she says about one such incident. A female porn star that had been in the industry for a while had excessive anal intercourse, and a piece of her muscle from her anus fell out on set while she was filming. Some females damaged their reproductive systems, which left them unable to have children. Ex-performer Emily Eve describes the physical and emotional toll that she suffered while she was in the industry. I shot scenes where I had to pretend to be dead and let someone rape my dead body. I came home bruised and sometimes a little bloody from the rough scenes. They slapped me and spit on me and called me horrible things. Time after time, I would go home and cry myself to sleep because I feared what the next day would bring. Now, it's no surprise why alcohol and drugs are used and freely distributed on porn sets, because the people within the industry want to escape reality and they need to zone out. Many porn stars say that they routinely binge on ecstasy, cocaine, marijuana, Xanax, Valium, Vicodin, and alcohol. This is a brutal reality of an industry that claims to desire the safety of its performers. Do porn stars freely choose their lifestyles? Some porn stars write books about their successes and how their experiences and working in the industry has liberated them. However, these are exceptions to the norm. As we look deeper into the issue, pornography actually seems more to resemble sex slavery, where women are subject to all manners of non-consensual abuse. Emily Eve says this: "When I finished with the scene, my throat was bleeding, I had bruises all over my body, my vagina was torn in two places, and I ended up with pink eye. I felt so weak, used, and honestly felt like I had been raped all over again." Karina Taylor says the following: during the scene with a male porn star, I yelled at him to stop and screamed no over and over, but he would not stop. The pain became too much and I was in shock and my body went limp. I couldn't fight him off anymore. After the scene, they wouldn't give me a ride home. I called a taxi and went to a medical clinic to check me out due to the severe pain that I was in. A day later, I received a phone call from Vince to keep my mouth shut about the rape. He threatened me that I didn't know who I was messing with and that his edited footage of what happened would prove me to be the liar. Is there a link between porn and child sex abuse? Is there a link between pornography and pedophilia? The overall trends for porn is sexualized youth. When pornographers use the terms barely legal, jailbait, sweeties, lolitas to market their product, they aren't just accentuating youth but childlikeness. There was a study that was done, 400 million web searches from 2009 to 2010, conducted by neuroscientists Ogi Ogasa and Sai Gadam, concluded that the most popular category of sexual searches online by a huge margin contained the word youth. This is what Professor Dan Allender calls the pedophilic drift. And what you tend to notice is that, especially within our culture, porn tries to adultify children. Adultify children. And like I said, I don't want you to restrict your perception of porn just to movies and images, because even when you look at music and the way that sexual scenes are produced in music, they are having an effect, a negative effect on children. And me being a teacher at a high school who hears stories about girls in year 6 who are sexting their boyfriends, this is the grim reality that we're facing. Children as young as year 5 and year 6 and year 7 that are engaging in oral sex, engaging in sex, sexting, doing things like that. This is the production of a culture and the result of a culture that has allowed the pornography to hit our televisions, our ads, our music, our ads on YouTube as well. In 2002, Ashcroft versus the Free Speech Coalition was a landmark case for pornography. Now, prior to this, the Child Porn Prevention Act defined child pornography very broadly, including even virtual child porn. Any film, any cartoon that depicted a child or someone in a childlike state. However, unfortunately, the Ashcroft case was overturned because they saw the law as unconstitutional. Only pornography that uses real children is prohibited. Not cartoon, virtual children, that's actually legal. The reason why producers of pornography use children or are pushing the envelope is because they're marketing now to our brokenness, our broken desires. In 1984, this goes back a long way though, in 1984, the US Department of Justice funded a study to examine the images of children in Playboy, Penthouse, and Hustler magazines. In total, researchers looked at 683 issues printed from the year 1953 to the year 1984. And they found close to 1,000 images showing sexual scenarios of adults with children, implying incest or molestation. 51% of the child cartoons and 46% of the child photographs depicted children's age between 3 and 11 years old. Now, in the end, we're responsible for what we choose to endorse with our money and our mouse clicks. For those of you who think that it's okay just to watch adult porn, that might sound noble, but in the end, it only supports an industry that tries to sexualize its youth. Now, if you're of the opinion, or if you know anyone that's of the opinion that if I don't pay for it, I'm not contributing to it, listen to this. 80 to 90% of the material online is free anyway. And we know that in recent years, the revenue from porn has declined. It's almost 50% of what it used to be. So how do porn sites try to make their money now? One way is through malware, malicious software, which can include viruses or spyware that are downloaded to a user's device without his consent. Now, what does malware do? It causes technical problems and can monitor and control the user's online behaviors. That's the point of why porn industries, they pay for that kind of information. Porn sites, they also contain sidebars and display ads on them. For anyone who's in marketing, money is paid to porn sites every time someone clicks on the ad. It's known as a pay per click. Or every time the ad is shown. So you don't need to look at that, you don't need to click on the ad, it just needs to appear on your browser, and porn sites are paid on a cost per impression. In other words, by merely browsing porn sites and spending hours racking up page views, you are contributing to porn's profits. The more you add to a website's popularity, the more money the company makes. So if you know anyone who's of the opinion that as long as I don't get a subscription, as long as I don't pay for the pay-per-view, as long as I'm not paying for it at all, as long as I'm not paying for DVDs and going to sex shops, it doesn't work. The industry does not work like that anymore. Moving on to the negative effects of masturbation, because this is usually an end of pornography. Now, studies have found, and this is contrary to some of the studies that were done even in Australia, that pornography has actually got positive health effects. And what they found was that the studies that were done were very misleading because they didn't differentiate between masturbation and ejaculation, which could have come through normal marital intercourse. Now, the negative effects of masturbation have found that modern studies have found that frequent masturbation is associated with more prostate abnormalities in males, less ability to recover from erectile dysfunction, less satisfaction with one's mental health, less relationship satisfaction, depression, and less happiness. C.S. Lewis, famous author and Christian, says the following. He said that a man's sexual appetite is meant to lead him out of himself and leading him into a being of self-gift that completes and corrects his personality. First, by sharing his whole life with a lover, and secondly, by procreating children, which is very similar to the Catholic understanding of marriage, which is two-dimensional, one being unitive and the second being procreative. With masturbation, however, the appetite or the desire turns in on itself and it sends man back into his own prison, where he is left with his harems or his own sexual fantasies. Now, what's the harm in this? Lewis says that the problem with masturbation is that a man seeks and ends up preferring his own fantasy world to reality. For the images that he will continually go to in his head are always accessible to him. They're always easy to get to. No longer do you have to get into hard conversations and relationships and spending money and doing the hard yards. Now you can just be within the privacy of your own room. The images pop in your head. You put on a movie, you put on a DVD, you scroll through Facebook at provocative images, and you're done. And unfortunately, these psychological attractions, no woman can actually rival. In the end, masturbation is to be avoided as it retards the process of this self-giving. The danger is that with masturbation, a man ends up loving, or a woman ends up loving, the prison that they've trapped themselves in. Now, one of the second last points that I want to make, or the last point, sorry, that I want to make, is the correlation between porn and the acceptance of rape myths. Okay, and the acceptance of rape, sorry. Many studies show that pornography and rape myth acceptance go hand in hand. In a study of 46 cases published from 1962 to 95, researchers concluded that people who watch pornography or consume pornographic material correlates to a 31% increase in the acceptance of rape myths. Now, this is far from an overstatement. In 2007, researchers analysed the top-selling pornographic DVDs, viewing 304 sex scenes in total. This is what they found. Taken together, the scenes contained 3,376 acts of verbal or physical aggression. That's an act of aggression for every minute and a half on average. 88% of the scenes contained at least one act of physical aggression, such as slapping, gagging, hair pulling. Verbal aggression was present in about half of these scenes. 73% of instances of aggression were men being aggressive to women. And in 95% of the scenes, the person receiving the aggression reacted neutrally or positively to it. They liked it, or they showed that they liked it. Positive and healthy sexual acts, such as kissing or complimenting, were only found in 10% of the scenes. So look at the education that our children, or people who are being recently exposed to pornography, and even people who have been addicted to pornography for a long time, look at how we're getting raised and how we're getting brought up into the world that we're getting involved in. How many times do you hear, especially amongst males, especially young males, when you hear about girls that are being taken advantage of, there's always someone in the group, or the majority of the people in the group, yes, she said no, but really she meant yes, or that she really wanted it. Yeah? Where does that come from? That comes from a lifetime of pornographic education. These are important questions that you need to ask yourself. To those who are married, will married life cure your porn addiction? So if you're addicted to pornography, or you know someone that's addicted to pornography, do you think that automatically as soon as you get married it's going to go away? Married life no more cures a porn addiction than winning the lottery cures a gambling addiction. A person so trained on the pornographic experience isn't merely after a good orgasm, he is hooked on the anticipation on what comes next. Porn should be used as sexual aid to enhance intimacy. So that's the other myth, that people who aren't having such a great sex life can usually bring in pornography in order to assist it. The fact is that many studies show that porn doesn't complement sexual intimacy, it competes with it. If you become more and more dependent on images of other naked people in front of your face in order to be aroused, then you are castrating your brain. And the last thing is, how do we protect children from watching porn? You know, our own children, our younger brothers, sisters. Cyber Psychology and Behavior released the results of a study showing that 93% of boys and 62% of girls in the United States see porn before the age of 18. And many of these exposures are not shut the laptop and walk away, but porn binges, excessive hours of pornography use. According to the 2010 Youth Internet Safety Survey, a quarter of US teens are exposed to porn online when they aren't even looking for it. When they aren't even looking for it. What are ways that we can protect children? There's an application called Covenant Eyes, which monitors the websites that kids visit and rate them by age appropriateness. When it comes to mobile phones, with iPhones, you can actually go to the user settings and you can actually set restrictions. And you can also customize them as well. It's also very important, a lot of the time we think as parents that it's better not to have those conversations with our children. But what Matt Fradd, who wrote the book The Porn Myth, which is where I got a lot of my information from, which I failed to let you guys know of at the start, and if you want more information, I really recommend you reading that book. He actually says the opposite. He says that it's important for you to have conversations with your children about these topics. Obviously not getting into detail, but just letting them know. And my wife was speaking to a friend of hers whose husband's a police officer, and he said that it's very important that even from a young age, girls understand what their private parts are, and so do boys, so they're able to explain in cases of situations where they might have been molested or abused. God forbid. YouTube has got ad block plus for Chrome, which turns off related videos and also filters out ads and content that may be questionable. Because a lot of the time, and especially for parents, or even if you are going through a phase where you've given up pornography and you're battling the addiction, and you're just trying to watch something sincere, something harmless, something pure, you think, on YouTube, or even when you're playing a game, there that ad pops up with a sexually provocative woman on there. And where do these ads come from, these inappropriate ads? Like I said before, porn producers pay a lot of money to clinicians to be able to get the kind of data to be able to try to get people addicted, okay? And to get them when they're not even realizing it. Unfortunately, Netflix and a lot of these other shows that people get subscriptions to, they have a lot of bad content on there as well. But the good thing about Netflix is that it does have parental controls, and you can actually set up filters for them. Now, this one lady who runs a campaign online says that even when it comes to your children and wanting to make sure to keep them safe from pornography, he says even when it comes to television, pre-recording TV nowadays might not seem like such a bad idea, because a lot of the ads on there are very sexual in nature. So rather than just saying, you know what, we don't want our children to watch TV at all, pre-record the shows and only put on the shows that you know are going to be good for them without exposing them to ads that might come in between. And when it comes to mobile phones as well, a lot of games, for example, have a lot of ads that pop up. However, you can set the mobile phones to airplane mode so that these ads don't end up popping up. Now, this is how to protect your children. What's the important way to protect yourselves, or if someone that you know is coming out of an addiction? Very important thing is to confess and to know that you have an addiction, and to seek out someone like a priest or a psychologist or a clinician and go and see them and tell them about your problems. Because the thing about pornography is that pornography is the silent killer. It's the one where each and every single one of us could be addicted right now to, but nobody would know, because you can't see the physical scars. They're only spiritual and psychological scars. from pornography. And it's the one that a lot of people are ashamed even to talk about. And there have been campaigns online from people who aren't even religious that are trying to find ways to deal with their addictions because they're realizing that their marriages are breaking up. They're getting divorced. They're not having happy sexual relationships with their partners. But for us as Catholics, we have to be aware of this and we have to fight it. And the best way to do it is not only just to be aware of it and to let other people know about it, but to seek help. And for us as Christians, because we have the grace of the sacraments, confession, especially a general confession of all of our lives, is of utmost importance. I am a teacher at a high school, and a lot of parents, they tell me that they don't know what their kids do in their bedrooms. They take their laptops into their rooms, they're on there all night, they don't know what they're doing. A lot of friends of mine as well, they've got little girls as well who are 10, 11 years old, and they give them mobile phones. But if you understand how ruthless the industry is to snatch their innocence, you have to be very careful. And in my opinion, you either should not be giving them mobile phones at such an early age, because remember, the prefrontal cortex takes to the age of 25 to develop. So what chance does a 10, 11 or 12-year-old have? And even for us, this is an addiction as well. But not just not giving them their phones, but teaching them, you know. And even like when it comes to schools as well, like at the school that I work at, if you hear the language amongst kids and the knowledge that they know about sex and about pornography and things like that, it almost makes it scary for me to want to send my kids to school. Because all it takes is just one incident, one laugh, one show, and they can be gone. Okay?